Ben, thanks for joining me today for
Hey,
this episode.
no problem, Jonathan.
Maybe to get started, can you tell us a little bit about the founding story behind Flagsmith?
Yeah, so it's a very it's a classic tale of a side project that came out of or was being built as part of the agency that I was running, and how that kind of grew into its own business, standing by itself, basically. So, very long time ago, 21 years ago, I started a software agency in London. And more recently, we were doing large cloud transformation projects for large organizations, working with larger teams, and migrating applications into the cloud, building applications on, cloud native stuff. And agencies are kind of a weird business because you've either got too much work or you don't have enough work. You've never got the perfect amount of work, pretty much. So when we had spare time, we'd go and do crazy projects that had no commercial value whatsoever. So like we built this LED wall, soldered this massive LED wall, wrote all the software on an Arduino and a Raspberry Pi, and open sourced all that, and still got like soldering irons and stuff in the office. And we built a stupid app called Life is Terrible, which was meant to be like Instagram, but where you post pictures of yourself when your life has gone wrong, and the filters on the app made the pictures worse. So we came up with these sort of stupid ideas, and it was partly to learn technology, but partly it was just to sort of let off steam. And then about 5 years ago, we started to think, okay, let's put some structure around the side projects that we work on as an agency, and let's try and find an idea that we'd like to work on, but that might have an opportunity to be a business in its own right. So we had a number of ideas. One of them was feature flags, partly because we saw how much trouble these larger organizations had deploying software. This is like classic problem where they were kind of doing agile, and they were doing weekly or bi-weekly sprints, and there was like 6 teams that all had to coordinate getting all their code ready for the end of the sprint, and then 1 or 2 of those teams found a breaking bug that meant that they couldn't go live, and then because they were all interconnected, you'd have to dump the deployment and do one in 2 weeks' time, and then that would happen again, and then that would happen again, and we were like, this is nuts. So partly because we had clients that were like, this would be a really good pattern to use. And then also because at the time, there was basically one entrant in the market for feature flags, which is the one that everyone knows, LaunchDarkly. And, they had a pretty good product, but it was really expensive. And so, the combination of, there were 3 things really. There was, those 2 that I've just mentioned. And then thirdly, there wasn't really an open source platform at the time. I can't remember if Unleash existed at that point, but we had ideas about what the platform should do and how it should, how it should be organized. And there wasn't a what we think of as like, if you need a database, you don't really think about it too much. You just go and use Postgres, right? And so we were like, well, there isn't that for feature flags in the open source world. Yeah, and so we we open sourced it, and nothing happened because we didn't really market it very well. We're not like go to market people. We didn't really know I don't think any of us knew what go to market was at the time, and I still don't really, which I can explain why a bit later. But we open sourced it, made it relatively straightforward to deploy. And did spend quite a bit of time on the kind of developer experience of like running it yourself. And then we thought, and again, this is kind of like another, not a mistake, but we just were like, well, how do open source companies make money? Well, they provide a paid API or paid service, right? So like you can host it yourselves, or, you can pay us and we'll run it and keep it patched and secure. And actually feature flags is quite an interesting problem because the APIs have to have pretty good latency, and they really mustn't go down. So we thought, well, that's great, right? Like you can self-host it and hack around if you want, but then, if you want to build, it's something that you'd want to have resilient architecture for. So it felt like that lent itself quite well to having a hosted API and service. So we put a very basic website together and connected it up to ChargeBee, which does all the billing and stuff. Yeah. And then nothing happened either on that side. Like we started to get a trickle of people subscribing, but I mean, the application was very, very basic. It was a very, very long way from what LaunchDarkly had in terms of like the breadth of the product. But yeah, like it slowly started to, to pick up steam in terms of like the stars and the ARR. But I mean, it was very slow. But we kind of didn't care because it was a side project, right? So we weren't, paying my mortgage wasn't dependent on Flags or Bullet Train at the time being successful. And actually, we'd spun out another business. We started off in co-working as a spin-off business, and then got out of co-working when WeWork came along and kind of destroyed the business model for everybody with £1 bazillion. And now we've got quite a successful virtual office business. This is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think is really powerful. Is if you, I mean, for software people, the obvious thing is have an agency or do consulting work, or have someone paying you for your time. That gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of side projects and things like that, because we've started maybe 10 like side projects or like worked alongside other people trying to do startups where we had an equity involvement and we weren't charging them. So yeah, we've started a lot of or been involved in a lot of businesses starting up, and it's kind of great because if they fail, then all right, you pick yourself up, you've learned a bunch, but you're not moving out your house and having to sell everything you own and whatever it is. So that's been a bit of a sort of unsung, it's a bit of a superpower really. And that was very instrumental in Flagsmith existing and being where it is today.
Super interesting. Thanks for sharing that funny story. I think one thing that's really standing out with Flagsmith is that you're completely bootstrapped, right? So yeah, can you maybe explain the reasoning behind that? Because I'm sure you could have easily raised VC money at basically any point. What's kind of your rationale behind staying independent?
I mean, there's a number of things. To be completely honest, I just didn't have the energy to like do it properly, right? This sounds trite, but I couldn't be bothered. I didn't want to go through the right, what's your next quarterly goal? And, I didn't want that. I didn't want that in my life. And the other people involved in the project wanted to be able to, I don't know, like work on it when we wanted to work on it and design and build and develop the product in the way that we thought we would want it to exist. And we didn't want like, here's like a bag of money and now like we've got a board and, there's like, someone phoning me up going like, why aren't we growing as quickly as we thought we were going to grow and all this sort of stuff. So it was partly, that there was that aspect. And then there was also, we didn't really need to do that. Like at some point we started to get inbound leads from large enterprise organizations wanting to run the platform internally. And that was something we missed when we sort of were building the business. We missed our target customer, which isn't people wanting to run on SaaS and like pay less than they're paying LaunchDarkly, although that is a component of our revenue. It's large regulated enterprise organizations that cannot buy SaaS, basically. And so these leads started to come in, and there's a number of reasons why that meant that we didn't have to, or it really did take the edge off. Like, we don't need to go and get this, we don't need to go and raise money and do all this stuff. So, yeah, but I mean, really, it was like, we just, there was some like ancillary things that sort of like helped in that decision. But the main one was like, we just didn't want to build that sort of business. We just wanted to build something that was profitable early on, and we could easily make it profitable early on because, well, by cheating, because the agency was paying for the engineering time to build the platform. So that's the kind of superpower. But then as the revenue started to grow, then I stopped working at the agency full time and moved over to building Flagsmith. And then like Matt, who wrote most of the back end, or all of the back end at the time, he moved over, and we could do that gradually over time in line with the revenue growth, basically. Yeah.
So how does it look like today? Is it kind of still kind of one team and just people go back and forth between Flagsmith and the agency, or is it like two separated entities?
No. So like, when I can't remember exactly what when the ARR was probably at like, I don't know, like 40 or 50,000 a year, maybe less actually. That was when I went and registered the company as a separate legal entity in the UK. Went and got a business bank account and blah, all that stuff. So that was the point at which we were like, right, no, this needs to be a separate business. I'm going to work on it. I mean, I still have a agency email address and still go out, like drinking with those guys. We still have the same office, but they're split off in that regard. Yeah. And so they're basically separate entities at this point. Yeah.
All right. Looking at the whole bootstrapping versus VC money question again. You said it, back when you started, there was like no other open source feature flagging tool. Now I think you have several open source competitors, some of them like heavily funded with VC money. For example, Unleash raised $14 million US.
Yeah.
Post-Hawk raised $27 million. So do you sometimes, like, are you now kind of afraid that you could fall behind if you don't go this path and also raise money so that you cannot keep up with them?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit, but at the same time, like, we've got a growing team now. So we're like 11 people now, and like 5 engineers. So like 5 engineers can do a lot, right? 5 engineers can build a lot of stuff. And we've got a few companies that help us, like on some of the more things that we're not as strong on, and we have people helping us write content and things like that. But yeah, I mean, that's just the decision we've made, and there's pros and cons of that. Like, yes, obviously, I mean, and we talk about this a lot. Like, if we had 15 engineers instead of 5, like, how much more would we actually be able to get done? Like, it's not 3 times as much. Like, I firmly, believe in the idea of like small teams, and the product is, there's the SDKs, and then there's like this monolith product, which we're happy at being, very, very happy with it being a monolith and simple to deploy. I don't feel like it will be a massive amount of difference in terms of, like features that we're building. But then on the flip side of that, and I can't really speak to this because I don't have experience of it, but if we'd have had someone invest, $10 million or whatever, they want that money back, and they want like 10 times their money back, and so they're going to start wanting to, increase the pricing, or when a client gets an annual renewal, crank up the price. And actually there's kind of a moral hazard in the sort of feature flag. It's one of those businesses where you could be a bit abusive of the fact that there's a lot of code lock-in with your platform. And we're working, the reason I'm on this governance board at CNCF is working on open feature, which helps prevent you from locking your code to a particular flag provider. So yeah, so like there is a flip side, which is like, these external pressures of, pushing the business in a different direction, different to the way that you'd want it to be. So yeah, like we have control over that.
Mm. I mean, looking at your marketing material and, for example, your website, I think it's not super clear that you're completely bootstrapped. Did you ever kind of think about making this also more visible to the outside? Because I feel there's also some like a benefit for the customer in that, right? If you, for example, look at Plausible, that kind of like Plausible Analytics that took a similar path to you, also kind of completely bootstrapped, open source. They are super loud about it and kind of put it out as a benefit for the customer. So it kind of shows, hey, we are not dependent on the next round, but we are like a sustainable business. We also will be there in 5 years.
That's a great point. I mean, maybe we should do that more. I mean, it's not something that comes up all that often in the sales cycle. Occasionally people ask about it. People will ask maybe like what the size of the company is, or, I don't know, like how long it's been running, or like, do we have like technical engineering support in the US time zone and stuff like that, which those questions were much harder to answer when there was like me. But now they're getting easier to answer. So I think also maybe our kind of like target customer wouldn't really, I don't know, maybe they wouldn't have that much. I don't know if I just don't know if they think about it. I don't know. It's an interesting point though.
Yeah, just something that came to my mind. Maybe let's talk a bit about your go-to-market strategy. I mean, you already mentioned, okay, that you still don't know for sure what that actually means, but maybe let's talk about how did you get to 1 million in ARR? Like, where did those customers come from?
Yeah, so it started out with this like very sort of like slow trickle of SaaS customers. But just to explain a bit more, I mean, I met 3 guys just when COVID hit, very, very start of COVID, basically, who had Valley careers doing like basically B2B enterprise software sales and go to market. And we did a kind of unusual deal with them where we gave them some equity in Flagsmith. They gave us a small amount of cash, like a very, very small amount of cash, more to sort of like demonstrate commitment really, rather than like, anything that the business could use in some sort of like large structural way. But then the deal that we made was that we'd give them a quarter of the business for the cash, and then we'd give them another quarter when we got to 30k MRR, so like nearly 400k in ARR. And at that point, we'd been getting this steady stream of inbound leads from very large organizations, like massive organizations that wanted enterprise licenses. They wanted to run it on premise. They wanted enterprise support and all this stuff that we just didn't really know how to. We didn't really know how to deal with that. And these 3 guys, Matt and Greg and Alex, they built their careers on doing exactly that. So that was where the revenue of the company started to really accelerate, was when we were able to start converting these inbound leads, and then B, valuing them correctly, because that was the other thing that we had like no idea about, was like how much do we charge for this stuff? Like we didn't know anything about what their needs were, and so that was when we kind of reoriented the go-to-market. I mean, we still have, pretty proud of the SaaS platform we've built. We've got like a geographically redundant edge network, which gives global low latency flags and failover, like we can lose like 3 Amazon regions and everything will still work kind of thing. It's got really, really, really good uptime. So we still have that as a component of the business. But the go-to-market in terms of like where we're spending our marketing budget, what sort of content we're writing, all of that was shifted to focus completely on our target customer, which is people who generally like people that want to run the platform in their own infrastructure.
So you said there was a lot of inbound leads coming in. Do you have any ideas where they came from? Was it just content that you put out, or?
No, I mean, I think we because there wasn't really anyone else doing it, or at the time, like there was maybe like I think there was like Unleash, and that was basically it. So people searching for on-premise feature flags or self-hosted feature flags or open source feature flags like that, we were like position 1 or 2 on Google pretty much from the get-go. Like we changed the name because Bullet Train's kind of I kind of still like the name, but it's terrible for SEO, like because you're competing with actual trains, which you don't want to do. So we were pretty quickly at the top of Google, and that's where people were finding out about us from. Yeah.
You recently shared a guest blog on our blog where you talked about kind of 5 learnings that you made on the road to 1 million ARR. And one point that really stood out to me was not defining your target customers early enough, because I think that's something a lot of open source founders don't get right, because they're just focused on, hey, I just want to get GitHub stars, I just want to get developer adoption, but they don't really think about the actual end customer that's going to use and pay for their product, right? So could you maybe elaborate on the process that you had at Flagsmith to define your kind of early ideal customer profile?
Yeah, well, I mean, it fell into place pretty quickly because we had, whether it's Polychrome is the company that invested in the business, and Greg and Matt and Alex had like a ton of experience in figuring out what that looked like. And then also we had a small number of enterprise customers already, and the vast majority of the inbound leads that we were getting were like, it was pretty easy to see the pattern, right? Like you didn't have to be a business genius to figure out what was common amongst these companies. But I think the trap that we fell into, like most engineering people, is they kind of don't want to get from behind their IDEs and talk to people and like have these like hard conversations with themselves and with like these potential customers about like, what actually do we have to build, and what features do these people actually care about, and what features do they not? Partly because engineers tend to they'd rather be coding than doing video calls with people they don't know, but also just because you might want to build features A, B, and C, really desperately want to build those features, but actually you shouldn't be building those features because those target customers don't care about those, or they're not interested in them. What they're interested in is like, does it run on OpenShift, and can I deploy it to Kubernetes, and can I connect it to my Active Directory and sync these groups and all this sort of stuff. Like, I don't know many engineers that get up in the morning and go, right, I really want to do an Active Directory sync today. Like, I really want to build that, or I want to go anywhere near SAML. Like, people generally don't do that, but that was what made it, and it, we'd be on sales calls, and it was pretty simple, right? Like, you just make a note of when they ask you, do you do X and do you do Y and do you do Z? You just make a note of all the times you answer no to one of those questions. And then you just, there's literally what we did. We had a spreadsheet with it got to about 20 features, right? Like, do you have Okta integration? Do you have LDAP integration? Do you do audit logs exported into Splunk? Blah, 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 blah. And we'd write them down, and every time that came up and we'd say no, we added a number in the column next to the request. And then we just built that. We just ordered it by what was the most common thing that people asked for. And then we just built it. And so now there's still a few times that we say no, and we're still going through that process, but it's much, much, much less common for us to come out of a meeting with more than one, like, no, we don't do that. Right. So, but yeah, and sometimes those are things that you're not that desperate to build out as a product team and an engineering team. But that was the thing that changed the angle of the growth graph, because if you're saying yes to we've got a SAML integration, and yes, you can sync your groups from SAML and that'll all naturally work perfectly, and here's the documentation for it, and we've got an integration with blah or Dynatrace or whatever, and then at that point you're starting to get a much better hit rate of wins. So yeah, that was pretty important.
What would be one piece of advice you would give any open source founder just starting out?
That's difficult because it depends what they're trying to achieve. Initially we were trying to achieve a platform that we wanted to exist, right? Like, it didn't exist and we wanted to exist, so we built it. Initially it was built for us, our agency, and we didn't care about SAML group sync, so we we didn't build it. But if we'd have cared a lot more about and focused a lot more on, like, we want to build this as a successful business, which we we do. I'm not trying to say that we don't care, and we don't want the business to grow and succeed. But yeah, like, making those hard decisions about, like, what features to work on next and what features to punt, and making those, like, understanding who you're answering those questions from, because you could go like, right, I don't care about SAML, I don't want that in my product, and that's fine. But if you want to sell it to a company that's turning over like $10 billion, then you're going to need all of those things, right? Like, you just so that, I think that would be the thing, is like, yeah, try. We would have grown more quickly if we'd have had those sort of like tough answered those, well, made those tough decisions like earlier on, rather than sort of like having to play catch up subsequently. Yeah.
Maybe as a last question, what do you think? How does Flagsmith looks like 5 years from now?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I'm almost certain that we won't have raised any money. I'd expect the team to be larger, but I wouldn't want it to be like, I don't know, let's say we grew 5x in 5 years, right? Which, or something like that. I wouldn't want the team to be 5x larger, really. Like, that's, I kind of feel like you can achieve a lot with a relatively small team, and your velocity tends to be, your per sort of headcount velocity tends to be better. Yeah, like making profit, not feeling like we're running in this, we don't feel like, that's the kind of thing when you say, like, do you worry that you're going to like fall behind with other companies? I don't really feel like, partly because it's a bootstrap business, but I don't really feel like I don't see the world like that. I don't feel like I'm running in a race next to someone and they're running faster than me. Like, yeah, sure. Like, when someone, I don't know, like, comes out and you look at a new entrant in the market and you're like, wow, their SDKs are amazing, or, they've got this really, really impressive SaaS architecture or whatever. Yeah, obviously we were a little bit like, like, it'd be great if we had something like that. But I'm not like lying awake at night going like, oh my God, like our SDK, you know what I mean? We don't feel like we're in that world. Yeah. And that's something that I would, if I could choose one thing that I wouldn't want to change in 5 years, it would be that sort of like perspective.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's a very refreshing perspective.
I mean, like, that's not to say that the company is growing and wants to grow, and like, if we can grow more quickly, that's great. But that's not the primary focus of the business. Primary focus of the business is to build a healthy, happy company and have clients that we like working with.
Yeah, I think that's a very great purpose. And thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
No problem.
I think there was a lot of valuable content in there for everyone looking to build and grow an open source company, and maybe also go a bootstrapped way. Where can people follow you if they want to consume more of your content, or maybe even get in touch with you?
Yeah, so not on Twitter, because I just spend all my time on Twitter ranting about Brexit and car-dominated cities. So if those things are interesting to you, then follow me on Twitter. GitHub.com/Flagsmith is probably the most important one. We have a Discord server, but the URL is like, a bunch of numbers. Yeah. So there's a Discord server that's actually been great. Like, we spent should we have a Slack or a Discord or whatever? Discord's been really great as a sort of like a tool to build the business as well. So yeah, Discord's probably the best way to do that.
Cool. All right. Thanks again for joining me. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks.
Bye.